Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of Eman Codes. Introduction, my name is Emmanuel Ajipong. I'm a cloud/DevOps engineer, and today we're going to talk about deploying an application on Kubernetes, specifically AKS. So let's just get right into it. Firstly, we're going to just discuss what the context of this video will be. We're going to first talk about the requirements that you need to be able to actually work along with this tutorial, first of all. And then the second thing is, what skills will you learn by the end of this tutorial? And then we're going to describe what AKS is, which is the Azure Kubernetes services. We're going to then look at the application that we're going to deploy. It's a Django application. It's very simple, just so that you know what it looks like. Then we're going to do a quick Azure Kubernetes services tutorial, so how to create it, etc. And then we're going to deploy the application that we've just shown you on AKS. And then finally, there's this great tool called Kompose. We're going to talk about it, and especially if you're interested in Kubernetes in terms of deploying application to production level, and you have a long list of essentially Docker Compose files, then Kompose is an essential tool that could actually help you cut down your deployment time. So these are the things that we're going to talk about. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So the first thing is the requirements. What do you need to be able to go along with this tutorial? The first thing you'll need is an Azure account. We're going to be deploying, we're going to be using Azure Kubernetes service, so you need an Azure account. The second thing is you need Visual Studio Code installed, or any editor of your choice. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, so it's probably easier if you get that one, but if not, that's okay. And then the third thing you also need is Docker installed on the computer that you're going to be working with. So I have a tutorial of how you can install Docker, which I will mention below, but if not, just research. I'll link some documentation below, which will show you how you can install Docker. And then the third, fourth, final thing is you need a Docker account. You don't necessarily need it. You can use the one that I will provide also. That's where we're going to be pushing our Docker images that we create. Brilliant. So let's go on with it. So what skills will you learn by the end of the tutorial? Well, the first thing I mentioned is the Azure skills. We're going to be deploying Azure, so you will learn a little bit about Azure. The repository that we're going to be using to store our code would be Azure DevOps. So you can become a little bit familiar with that. Of course, Docker for our Docker images, and then Git, because we're going to be pushing and pulling. And of course, this video is about deploying to Kubernetes. So Kubernetes will be something that you will learn, and then Docker images also is something that I hope that you'll be able to learn at the end of this video. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about it. What is AKS? So AKS stands for Azure Kubernetes Services. Now, in hindsight, it's still Kubernetes essentially, but it's just Kubernetes provided by Azure. The reason being in that it takes care of a lot more complexities during your deployment that if you were to use a standalone Kubernetes, you would have to figure out yourself. So one of the main things, for example, is that the health management of your service or of your node, that's something that you would have to take care of if you were to essentially have a bunch of servers together that you connect them on a network and have them run a Kubernetes application. You would have to worry about whether there's enough space being used or whether it's running perfectly well. If you use the AKS option, then you don't have to worry about that. All you need to worry about is actually deploying your application onto AKS and making sure that in terms of syntax and logic wise, it works. So it's actually much more easier to use. It takes care of the heavy lifting, and that's why you would want to use AKS specifically. So we're going to go straight into, we're going to show you the application that we're going to be deploying. Brilliant. So here is the application that we're going to actually deploy. Now, right now it's in the Azure DevOps repository. Now this particular form of, I guess, storing your code is similar to GitLab. It's similar to GitHub, and it's another option that you can use to store your code. AWS provides the same thing. So here's where I've stored my code. Essentially, there's only one branch created, which is the main branch, and the repo is called Space Projects. As you can see, to access this project, I've got the link below in the description. But essentially, if you go to dev.azure.com/emancodes and /get/space-projects, then you'll be able to come across this project. And what you want to do is you want to go ahead and you want to clone this particular repository into your own computer. So the way to do that is to go ahead and do, if you click on clone, we're going to clone through HTTPS. If you click on copy, if you copy that essentially, and then within your terminal, so you open up a terminal. A terminal is where you could actually write command line description. So first of all, you want to do is you want to go to the directory that you want to save the project to. I want to save the project to where I'm actually making this video. So I've already changed directory into that, but if I wanted to, I would then do CD and then wherever I wanted to. So now that I'm in that directory, all I have to do is write the command. I'll just make this slightly bigger so that you can actually see what I'm writing here. So go from the top. Let me just make this bigger for you. So if I type in git clone and then paste in what I've just copied from this, then we can go ahead and we'll begin to see the application being downloaded here. So here we go, and now we can see it being downloaded. It doesn't take too long, and then you can download it. Also, you can also download it as a zip file, so you don't have to necessarily run the git clone command. But I think if you're doing this tutorial, and your aim is to be a DevOps engineer or cloud engineer, I think these are commands that you should get familiar with. So brilliant, we've actually got our application here. We can see it's there, no problem. So let's go ahead and let's interact with it. So if we open up our Visual Studio Code, I hope you've got that installed. If you don't, that's okay. You can use whichever editor of your choice, and we bring that here. We can then go ahead and we can drag our application into that. So we've dragged it into it, and we can see all the files that we have. Now, just to a disclaimer, the application itself does not belong to me. I found it really cool CSS kind of like space file. Essentially, it's like a space description. You'll see it in a minute when we deploy it. But yeah, the main thing to bear in mind and the main thing to pay attention to is firstly the Docker Compose, which I created. So the Docker Compose essentially has a few commands. What it does is it looks at the service. It says build, and then build. This dot means in our current directory. So it should look for, what it needs to do is it needs to look for a Docker file within the current directory that we're working in. So here's the Docker file that it needs to build. Brilliant. And then once it's built it, which by me saying build it, essentially it needs to run through all the lines of code here, and it needs to create this image as something that we can use. So the first thing is it needs to grab, if you like, a template which has got Python already pre-installed. Then it needs to create a workspace or work directory with this particular path. Set these environment variables really well for us. Go ahead and install whatever it's in our requirements.txt file, which is just Django at the moment. Afterwards, it just needs to copy all of their stuff into this working directory. Once it's done that, then it can go ahead and it can run Python manage run server and this. Now this is a Django application, so Django is not too difficult. It's a web framework. It's not too difficult to use. Within the Django application, this is where essentially the application will be. So when we visit this URL, which is basically the port that we've got exposed, which will be 8000. Once we've hit that URL will literally open up the application for us. So it's not too difficult. And the main thing you need to pay attention to is the Docker Compose file and the Docker file. And then I think the last thing I would love to show you here also is I believe within the settings, I've set the allowed host to star. Now, of course, that's not exactly it's not exactly in terms of security. It's not exactly what you want to do. But if you're deploying your application, you want and it's a public facing application, of course, you want everybody to be able to access it. So that's when you would actually have the allowed host equals star, which means everybody can use it, everybody can visit it. Of course, the debug, I've set it to true, just so that because this is kind of like a development environment, if anything does go wrong, we would need to be able to see what the error is and debug it. And then the secret key, normally you would have that in an environment variable, but that's the point here, is to deploy to a Kubernetes. So brilliant. Now that we've got that sorted, let's go ahead and let's interact with it. So if you go to terminal and then new terminal on your Visual Studio Code, it will open up another internal terminal here, and it's already set it to be working within the directory that you've got here. So if we type into, so what we want to do is we want to deploy the application. So if we type in docker compose up -d -build, it will first of all go ahead and it will build the application. It will build the Docker image for us, and then after it builds it successfully, it will go ahead and run this command, and it hopefully have the application running in our local computer. Now I'll just explain to you what the commands basically mean. So -d means run the command, but run it in the background so that we can still interact with the terminal. And --build means build the Docker file. So build this file from scratch. So I hope that makes sense for you. And then if we press enter, it takes a while sometimes, but this one shouldn't take too long. Let me minimize this for us, and then let's go here. Brilliant. So it doesn't take too long. So as we can see, the application looks like it has created. It says network space project default created. We haven't actually specified a network, so it normally creates a default one for us. The network is essentially if we had multiple Docker containers. So if we had multiple, for example, Docker files, and we built multiple images, and we're running those at the same time, we would have to sometimes specify the type of network. So if these Docker containers need to communicate with one another, then we would set something like a network, like a bridge, which means they can actually communicate with each other. But today we're running a one singular isolated container. So the default network will be fine for us. So let's just have a look. If we do docker ps, hopefully we should have a container running. So it looks like the container is up running. And if we look at the logs of that container, and we copy it. So to look at the logs, you need the command docker logs and then container ID, paste that into that. We can see that, okay, cool. It says the application is running at 0:00. So we can actually, if we follow that link, let's see if we can follow that link. Yeah, we can follow that link. And then, so when I follow that link, it opens up, and this is the application. So this is the application that we want to deploy. This is what we're going to hopefully deploy on Kubernetes by the end of this video. So let's just go ahead, and now that we know that's working, we know that we know how to build our Docker file, we know how to get the code for this. Let's go ahead and let's actually do a quick AKS tutorial. Brilliant. Okay, so let's actually have a look at AKS. Now, to access what we need, you need to go to portal.azure.com. Let me just make that slightly bigger for us. So if you go to this, if you don't have an account, you need to create an account. So if you have a Microsoft account, then it's relatively simple. You enter your email, you enter your password, and then of course, it will ask you for certain card details because of course you're borrowing resources from Microsoft or from Azure. So in case you overrun, it will then need to kind of collect payment from you. But don't let that scare you. You do get an initial £200 free trial essentially. So at the moment, this tutorial is not going to cost you anything at all. So once you've set up, you follow the card details and your card details, and you create your account, you can then go back to this URL again, and you will see the dashboard here. In order to actually create AKS, you need to create a resource group. Now, if you can imagine a resource group like a bowl, for example, and within that bowl, you can set in, your source pan. You can set in all your other itineraries that you want. So in this bowl of the resource group, we're gonna create our AKS. So first we'll go ahead and we create a resource group. So we create the bowl first, if you like. And I'm gonna call my resource group, I'm gonna call it space project. Or actually, I'm gonna call it something like, I'm gonna call it DevOps, right? So something appropriate. And then the region, if we look at the definition, so choose the Azure region that is right for you and your customers. So normally I'll say choose a region which is most closest to you. Let me just move that out of the way for you. So yeah, so portal.azure.com is a URL you want to visit. The region, I'll say choose a region is closest to you. So wherever you're located in the world, I'm in the UK, so I would go for UK West. It's quite similar to region to, for example, the data center. So it's wherever the resources are housed, wherever they're keeping the resources. So the servers, you want to choose the one closest there. That way you can decrease the latency time, especially if you're setting up something which is production worthy, and say your customers are going to be, I guess, within the UK, for example, then you want to set your region there so it's easier for them to reach. So brilliant. You've got your region, and then you want to review and create. So it does a dry run just to make sure that all the basic checks are in order. So our resource group is called DevOps. Brilliant. And then we can go ahead and create. It doesn't take too long to create, and then we can hopefully see it create. Yeah, so it's gone ahead and it's created our resource group. Now, if we go to, once it's created it, you click on go to resource group, and just make that slightly bigger for you. You click on go to resource group. Now here is, now you've got the bowl. Here you can create all types of resources. So if you click on create, let's say close, it will load up a bunch of things that you can actually create. So depending on what projects you're doing, you can go ahead and you can browse, and you can I guess you can rent resources. But because we're interested in AKS or Azure Kubernetes services, you type in AKS at the top there. It will bring you down Azure Kubernetes services. You click that, and it will show you a bunch of different ones. The one you want to create, so a Kubernetes Fleet Manager, for example, is another service that you can use. We're interested in literally Azure Kubernetes services. So you click here, create Azure Kubernetes AKS, and it will bring you this drop down menu. Now we're creating it. Pay attention to the resource group that you're creating into. So we're creating it in the bowl, in that DevOps bowl. So we've got that there, and you need to give it a cluster name. So we're creating our AKS cluster essentially, and I'm going to call it space project. Brilliant. The second thing we need to worry about is the size of the nodes that we're using. Because this is going to be a small application, it's not going to be too demanding CPU wise. We can go for D2S underscore V3. So you select that and you click select. So to do that, you want to go and change size, select the D2S underscore V3, and then select. Brilliant. And then we want to do the same thing again. We want to do review and create. Don't worry about all the other items that we need. We just want to deploy to Kubernetes. We'll have a video and actually go into a lot more detail as to what each of these does. So we'll review and create. It will do a dry run also. And hopefully it passes a dry run. The dry run checks that naming conventions is correct, that you've set everything correctly. So it looks like it's passed a dry run, and then you click create. I will admit this stage does take a while. It needs to go ahead and set up your cluster for you. So we need to set up sometimes volumes and stuff like that. So it will take a while, sometime 2 to 5 minutes. So we'll fast forward and we'll come back to that when it's done. Brilliant. So here you can see it's actually created. My one actually took about 3 to 5 minutes, I believe. But yeah, it's great. It's created my resource, the cluster for me. So once yours is done, if you go to resource right there, you can go ahead and you can begin to connect to the resource. So the way to connect to the resource, let me just start that again for you. So go to resource. If you click connect here on the top, and then open Cloud Shell. And then here you need to create storage for you to actually begin to interact with the terminal of your clusters. So we're literally, what we're doing is right now is we're doing what's called in some ways SSHing into the server that's running our Kubernetes clusters for us essentially, and that takes a while. So we'll come back to that. Yeah, so brilliant. So now it's connected to my Kubernetes cluster. I hope it's the same for you. Now you can go ahead and you can actually practice some Kubernetes commands. So if we want to look at the pods that are currently running, so kubectl will be the command, get pods, and we can see no resource found in default namespace because we haven't actually set any deployments. We haven't set any services. We haven't set any manifest scripts in place. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create those things. So brilliant. Now I hope you know how to actually create your own AKS cluster through the dashboard UI. So on the next part of the video, we are going to actually look at deploying the application that we run. So we just done a quick AKS tutorial. We're gonna then deploy our application onto AKS. So yeah, stick around and see what happens. Right, so this is the crust, I guess the the icing on the cake, we're going to actually deploy the application on Kubernetes, on AKS. Now, the first thing I think we need to be aware of is, in the deployment, how do we actually deploy applications on AKS? How does it work? So when we were actually building this particular deployment, this particular file, essentially, we created an image. And I told you again that when we run that command, docker compose up the -- build, the -- build, it essentially created the image in the background. It created that image from scratch, and then every time you update it, it will create that image again from scratch. So if we actually cancel this comment, and then we do docker image ls, we can see here that there's an image created, which was a space project. So that's what we created 32 minutes ago. So when I guess it's been 32 minutes since I've been filming this video, but yeah, so that's, you should see, if you're following along and you did a docker image ls, you should see that you've got one image created. Brilliant. Now there's a problem with this particular image. The first thing is that if we're going to use this image to run on Kubernetes, we need to add an extra command in there, which is this command that I've hashed out. So you need to unhash this particular command. So it's that command that we saw here, which is a Python manage run server. We saw this command here in the Docker Compose. We need to set this command here. And what this basically does is that once the image has been downloaded by Kubernetes and it executes the image, it will then run this command within that image. So once we pull down this image, and the image essentially, if you remember, is everything in this file, copy this file, basically copy everything in that file, and then open it somewhere else. So open it within this app. Brilliant. So it does that. But so now we can save it, and then we can now look at building a proper image. The second thing also to bear in mind is that I'm not too sure what computer you're working on. If you're working on a Mac, then you will face something known as, so the command to actually build the project is docker image build, docker build dot, which will then build the image. So the command for this basically is the command for build dot is basically docker build dot, and then it should do that for you. But if you were to use that image that's built, so if you were to use this image on AKS, you will come across what's known as an architectural error, which means that because you're building, for example, if you're using a Mac, it will build the image with kind of like a base of the Mac's operating system, and that's not what will work with AKS. So you need to specify that for it. So we're going to do that. The way we specify it is we'll use a command called build x. So the way we would build it is build docker build x. So you can run this command alongside if you like. Build x, then build -- platform. So we set the platform equals, and we'll set the platform to Linux AMD64. Brilliant. And then we're going to tag our Docker image. Now, here's where we now talk about Docker Hub. If you don't have an account on Docker Hub, you need to go to hub.docker.com and set up your credentials, set up your password, your username, verify your email, and then you can go ahead and you can then you should have an empty repository. Maybe if you don't have one, you should have an empty repository. Now the way to actually go ahead and push your image. So what we're going to do, once we've created our image, we're going to push that image to our Docker Hub. We're going to push it here. That way our Kubernetes, our AKS cluster can download that from Docker Hub, if that makes sense. So the way to do that is that now that we've got this command, we're going to do -t. -t is to tag it. So give that name. So the name that we've got here, space project space, for example, I want to give it a specific name, and the name I want to give it is, first of all, if we're going to push it to Docker Hub, right, it has to follow the format of your username. So my username is Emmanuel AGY. So Emmanuel AGY / and then the name of the repository, or the name you want to give it. So the name I'm going to give it is space proj right there, because I've already got another one called space project. So I'm going to call it space proj. And when I press enter, ooh, this is brilliant. So we've actually got an error here somewhere. So it says Docker build dash start a build. Error, Docker build requires exactly one argument. Of course. So what I did not do is I did not give it where to start the so I didn't tell it where the Docker file is. So you tell it by doing dot, and then now we shouldn't see a problem, and it should go ahead and it should begin building. So brilliant, we can see that it's built in. So if we do a Docker image ls, we can see there's two images here. One was the one that was built from the Docker Kompose file, which is the Docker, which is the space project space, and then the ones that we created just now, which is the Emmanuel AGY space project. If you're coding along, then your name should be the username that you have. So mine is Emmanuel AGY, and you can see that was created 7 seconds ago. And now what we're going to do is we're going to push this to Docker Hub. I'm hoping that if you've got your own Docker Hub created, your account created, I might do a video on how to actually create your Docker account, but it shouldn't be too difficult. Once you've got that created, you need to connect to your Docker Hub through the terminal. And the way you do that is Docker login dash username, and then you can put your username there. So whatever username you have, you put it in there. And once you put that in there, it should hopefully prompt you for an address. It should prompt you for a password, sorry. So it will, if dash username does not work, and your username, then try maybe dash double dash username. It's either I think it's actually Docker login double dash username. So brilliant. If you've logged in successfully, then you can go ahead and you can push this image to Docker Hub. So to do that, you do Docker push, and then the name of the repository. So this is what we're pushing. So we copy and paste that there, and we can see it start to push immediately. Now this bit, I will admit, this bit does take a while. So yeah, we'll come back to it when it's brilliant. So my one is showing me that it says latest digest, and it's pushed that. So if I go back to my Docker Hub and I refresh, I should see a new image. Here we go, Emmanuel AGY space proj. Brilliant. And it's got 0 downloads. So we've got that there ready. Now we can actually look at creating so Kubernetes has this thing called a Kubernetes manifest, right? The manifest is similar to what you have here, which is the Docker Kompose, and it tells Kubernetes how to deploy or how to run your application. In that manifest, you can specify the ports that you need. For example, you can specify the commands, you can specify environment variables that you want your application to run with. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the manifest. So if I bring this here and I do clear, so we're going to create the manifest here first. That was easy for me to talk about, and then afterwards we're just going to paste. We're going to go back to our Kubernetes here, and then we're going to copy and paste those manifests that we created in here, and then run it from there. So we're going to need 2 files for our manifest. The first one, so the command to create a manifest, you can either do right click, new file, and then we're going to call the manifest space dash deployment dot YAML, right? That's the first file. And the second file you can create for the same route, or you can do touch, and then we're going to call it space dash service dot YAML space dash service dot YAML. So we've got 2 files here. The reason why we have 2 files here, the first file is the manifest. It tells Docker, it tells Kubernetes essentially the item, so the image of the application that we're running. It tells it about essentially the ports. Also, we will specify the ports in there. We will set certain metadata in there for it, and then the space service is where we're going to. It's basically you need that space service so that you can expose certain elements of your application. So once we execute this space deployment, it will create what's known as pods within within AKS, and the pods needs it needs to have certain abilities. So the pod needs to be able to be accessed from anywhere outside of the of AKS. So anyone on the internet should be able to go to our IP address and see our application, and we specify those rules essentially within the service manifest. So we're going to go ahead and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create our manifest. Brilliant. So we're going to now go ahead and create our manifest. Now, just to save time, as I don't want this video to be too long, I'm going to paste in the items that you will need, and we're going to talk about it quickly. So the deployment, this is what it's going to look like. I would really love for you to pause the video here and then literally write everything that you see in your own file. That way you understand what's going on here. So if you remember back to my first ever video I created on Kubernetes, I talked about some of the items that you need when you're creating a manifest. The first one, you need to specify the API version, you need to specify the kind, and then you need to specify the spec. So here we've got the kind as deployment, we've got the API version as apps v1. Now the spec is what's really important here. Also, we're going to say for this particular pod, we want 2 pods created, and then the match labels app will equal space. Now the match labels is important within the space service, especially when you have multiple pods that needs to communicate with each other. Then the service will then understand where it needs to speak to by going across like the match labels and also the labels that you set. So here within our image, we've got it as space image, so we need to change this to the image of our Docker that we had in our Docker. So in our Docker hub, my image was called Emmanuel AGY space proj. So I need to then change this to space proj, and that will be the same for whichever one you used. You need to call it the same thing. Brilliant. So we can go ahead and we can save that, and then we can go to our space service, and we can copy, and just to save time also, I wrote these manually, but I just want to save time. And then within our service here, now within our service, it's referencing what we've created within our deployment. So for example, our labels is also space, so it looks for any pod with the name space, and then what it does is it creates a load balancer. Now traditionally, a load balancer, it's, if you imagine that you have different servers and a lot of people are trying to access the service, then the load balancer would, depending on which server has way more traffic going to it, it would balance that for you. But the load balancer also has an ability where it can give you, in this particular situation, it can give you an external IP address. So if we go back to our cluster and we do kubectl get service, we should see one service. So we've got the service of our Kubernetes cluster. As you can tell, it has no external IP address. It only has an internal IP address. It has no external one. So for our application, we need it to have an external IP address. That way we can actually visit that application on the external. Brilliant. So now that we have that, and same thing, we need to specify the app version, we need to specify the kind, and we need to specify the spec, and then we need to specify the port. The port is 8,000, and the target has to be 8,000, and that's relating to the port of the pods essentially. So it's not too different from what we've seen here. It's not too different, of course. The only difference, of course, is the command. The command is not explicitly exposed here within any of our manifest, and that's because our command, remember, we set it here so that when the image is downloaded within our space deployment.yaml, when it's downloaded there, we can go ahead and we can see it. It would automatically run that command for us. So let's go ahead and let's create these files within our cluster. So that's where we had it obviously when we first launched it. So we go to our cluster, we do clear, and then let's do touch space dash deployment.yaml. The great thing about touch is that you can create two or more files at the same time. And the second one was space dash service.yaml. Brilliant. And then it should create 2 files for us. So we've got 2 files created. the first one we're going to then copy and paste it into the space deployment. Now you can use Vim or Nano. I prefer Vim. So if you do Vim and then space deployment, it will open up. That way we can go ahead and we can copy. Let's copy that into there. Be careful when you're copying, because as you can see here, it's gone ahead and it's moved the replica one. So indentation is very important to Kubernetes manifest. So we press I to edit it, and we need to bring that all in line. Make sure the indentation is fine, just like how we've had it here. So when you're copying this file, make sure the indentation is correct. So pause it. I'll actually make this available also within the branch. I'll create a second branch within this project, and then that way you can copy it. You can have the exact thing that we've got here. So let me go ahead and let me save it. So to save it, if you're using Vim also, you press escape, shift : and then WQ. That's saved in, and then we can go ahead and we can do the same for the space services. And then we can copy that across in there. Same thing, and it doesn't seem to be any indentation error. So we go ahead and we WQ. Now, this is hopefully this should wrap up the entire video for us, and this is what we've been waiting for. We're going to deploy this. So if we do ls, we can see all our files are there. Let's see if we can deploy this. So the command to deploy or to execute all these files we want to do is kubectl apply -f. -f means we want to give it the path as to where the files are. And so the path I'm going to give it is in this directory. So in this directory, I'm saying run both these files for us, please. And if we press enter, hopefully we should see deployment apps, space app created and service app created. So if we do kubectl get pods this time, we should hopefully see, oh, I spelled it wrong. So kubectl get pods, we should see 2 pods have been running. So we've got 2 replicas. Remember we said we wanted 2 replicas. So it's got 2 pods running. But let's look at the events, or we can actually look at the logs. So the logs for Kubernetes will be kubectl logs, and then you copy and paste in the name of the pod, and it should bring you it says that the application is ready to be viewed. So they say the application is ready to be viewed on that portal. That portal, don't click on that portal, because that's not a portal of your IP address, of the IP address. So let's do clear. But what I want to show you is if you do kubectl get events, it will show you the process of how we did it. So first of all, it went ahead and it pulls the application, it pulls the image. It says successfully pulled image. Let me see if I can make it smaller. Yeah, so if you can see successfully pulled image, so it's gone ahead to my Docker hub and it's pulled this image, and if I refresh it, I should see it go to 1. Hopefully I should see it go to 1. Oh, actually it hasn't updated yet. It may take a while to update, but it should have eventually gone to 1 to say that it's pulled from here. But that's not a problem. It definitely has pulled. It definitely has pulled that image from there. But if we do kubectl get services, we can then see that we now have an external IP address. So our application is now running at this IP address called space. So if we copy that, bear in mind it's running at port 8000. So if we open a new tab and then type it, give it port 8000, press enter, brilliant. So our application has deployed 2 Kubernetes pods and is currently running on 2 pods. If you follow this application so far, then well done. You've successfully deployed your application onto a Kubernetes cluster. Obviously it's a single application this time, so don't worry about that. But the next video I'm going to create a video on which we're going to basically have multiple backends running. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to write a new project, and we're going to have multiple backends running, and we're going to see how the pods can communicate with each other. We're going to talk about how we network those pods. So before we end the video, you need to make sure that you completely destroy the resource that you've created, so that it doesn't run up space. So the way to destroy it, you need to basically destroy all of these, delete all of these items. So if you click on DevOps, for example, and then you click delete resource, copy and paste that DevOps item here, the name of it, enter it there, and delete. It will take a while to delete, but it will eventually delete for you. And once that's done, then you can go along and delete all of them. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot from this video. I know I definitely did. I hope to see you the next time where we will do more videos on Kubernetes. But hopefully you've learned a new skill today. And even if you didn't watch the entire, if you didn't even code along, I hope even just watching, you were able to pick up a few things here and there. But thank you very much for your time. My name is Emmanuel, sorry. This channel is Eman Codes. Please like, please subscribe, and please leave your comments as to how you found the video. But thank you very much for your time. So before I forget, let's just quickly talk about Kompose. Now, Kompose is essentially a shortcut to writing the manifest script for Kubernetes. So you see how we actually went ahead and we wrote this and we copy and pasted them in. If your Docker Compose file is extremely long, for example, then you could use Kompose, and what Kompose does is it creates a manifest script based upon your Docker Compose file. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to move Kubernetes. We're going to create a file called Kubernetes, and then we're going to move all our manifest scripts to Kubernetes. Brilliant. So we moved it there, and then the way to, if you're on Mac, the way you install Kubernetes Kompose is brew install Kompose, and then I will install it for you. Now to use Kompose, all you gotta do is Kompose convert -f, and then you specify the file that you want to convert to Docker Compose. So I'm just gonna close it. And what Kompose normally does is it creates those files in a directory that you're working in. So let's see if that works. So as we can see, it's created 3 files here, 2 of which is more important. So let's look at the space deployment. As you can see, it's actually created a lot more things than we had in comparison to our file. It's got this bit a little bit wrong, and that's okay. The image, it hasn't really set an image, and that's probably because we haven't actually set an image with our Docker build. So let me just clear this. Let me just change that to image, and then let's have it create. Let's have it create its own image for us. So let me just go ahead and let me just delete all of these files. That way we can start from scratch again. It's really good that we can actually make these kind of mistakes, and then we can correct them. So brilliant. So now if I was to run this Docker Compose file, it would actually go ahead and pull the image from the Docker Hub directory for us. So let's just rerun that script again. Compose convert -f Docker Compose. And if we look at the deployment this time again, we should see that it's now specified the image for us. This is pretty much not really correct. I don't think the argument needs to be placed in this fashion. I would imagine the argument all has to be in one line, like so, and you can delete this, but it does set the ports correctly. It does set a mount for us within the container. Let's look at the service. Same thing, but it doesn't actually create as a load balancer, because that's what we needed it for. But that's okay. But the great thing about Kompose is that it cuts that time for you, so you can go ahead and you can make edits here and there, and you can quickly have your Docker Compose applications ready to be deployed in maybe half the time potentially. But yeah, I hope you this is now officially the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a lot. But thank you very much for your time, and hopefully see you next time. Thank you. Take care.